When the story of this war began, the skies over Ukraine were meant to belong to Russia. It was a foregone conclusion, a truth written in spreadsheets and military parades. In 2022, Russia commanded one of the planet's most formidable air forces, a behemoth of steel and fire. Ukraine, by contrast, looked to the heavens with fewer than 100 fighter jets and a patchwork of aging Soviet-era air defense systems. On paper, the contest for air supremacy should have been a brief, brutal affair, settled in mere days. But history rarely follows the script. By 2024, a new reality had taken hold. Ukrainian defenders were plucking more than 83% of incoming Russian missiles from the sky. They had methodically hunted and eliminated air defense installations valued in the hundreds of millions. And a new kind of weapon, the long-range drone, was reaching across borders to touch Russian air bases over 1,000 kilometers away, turning strategic bombers into smoldering wreckage without a single Ukrainian pilot ever leaving friendly airspace. Russia's vaunted air defenses weren't just being challenged, they were buckling, disintegrating under the pressure of a relentless and ingenious campaign. What has unfolded in the skies above Eastern Europe is not merely a surprise, it is a fundamental rewriting of the rules of modern aerial warfare, and its consequences are reshaping the entire conflict. Let's delve into how this happened. The deliberate dismantling of Russia's air defense network has been a quiet, patient masterwork of asymmetrical strategy. The open-source intelligence community, through organizations like Oryx, has provided visual confirmation for the neutralization of at least 18 S-400 launchers, alongside 3 critical radar units and 3 of their transport vehicles since the conflict's outset. These were not isolated strokes of luck or opportune accidents. Each successful strike represented a monumental effort, a piece-by-piece takedown of Russia's capacity to project power and deny Ukraine the ability to fight back. Consider the events of late June 2025. Ukraine's Military Intelligence Directorate, the HUR, unveiled a strike of surgical precision against key elements of an S-400 complex in occupied Crimea. In that single operation, they vaporized 2 multifunctional fire control radars, 2 long-range surveillance radars, and an S-400 launcher. It was a perfect illustration of Ukraine's evolving capability to strike Russia's most sophisticated defensive hardware with devastating accuracy. The 91N6E radars, known colloquially as Big Bird, which were lost in these engagements, are not just any radars. They are high-power PISA systems, the very eyes of the S-400 network, engineered to detect stealth aircraft at extreme altitudes. Without them, the S-400's long-range engagement capability is profoundly crippled, leaving gaping holes in the defensive shield for Ukrainian forces to pour through. The campaign didn't stop there. Ukraine also found success against Russia's more recent S-350 Vityaz systems, platforms touted as the pinnacle of modern medium-range air defense. In a moment of tragic irony, some of these systems defeated themselves. One 50 P-6E transporter launcher was lost not to enemy fire, but to a Russian minefield it had mistakenly entered, becoming hopelessly stuck and abandoned. Then in the early days of June 2025, Ukraine executed Operation Spiderweb, arguably the most daring aerial assault of the modern era. The results, as claimed by Kiev, were staggering. Roughly 1/3 of Russia's entire fleet of strategic bombers, the very aircraft that carry its cruise missiles, were damaged or destroyed. This single operation represented the zenith of planning and technological prowess achieved by Ukraine's drone program over 3.5 years of brutal warfare. The mission's architecture was audacious. It involved 117 first-person view drones, which had been covertly transported deep into Russian territory and launched from unassuming trucks. From there, they conducted simultaneous attacks on 5 separate Russian air bases, a coordinated blow that stretched across 5 time zones. The planning for this single night of destruction reportedly took more than a year and a half, with direct oversight from President Volodymyr Zelensky. The drones, concealed in containers, had traveled thousands of kilometers from Ukraine to their launch points. The attacks penetrated as far as the Belaya air base in Russia's Irkutsk region, a staggering 2,500 miles from the Ukrainian border. For the first time, a Ukrainian-made weapon had struck Siberia, sending a clear message that no corner of Russia was safe from their reach. The aircraft targeted, the Tu-95 and Tu-22M bombers, are relics of the Soviet Union. Their production lines went cold with the collapse of the USSR, making them truly irreplaceable. Every loss is permanent. This points to the dual nature of Ukraine's strategy. On one hand, you have these incredibly precise operations, like a surgeon's scalpel, targeting vital Russian assets, both offensive platforms like the bombers and defensive ones like the anti-air batteries. This pressure has effectively forced Russia to relegate most of its manned aircraft to the role of simple glide bomb carriers, abandoning more complex surveillance or attack missions. But the second, and perhaps more strategically significant, part of the campaign has been the relentless targeting of munitions depots throughout Russia. By striking the arsenals that feed the war machine, Ukraine denies the front line the supplies it needs, rendering the anti-air systems themselves somewhat moot. Of the 20 primary missile and artillery directorate, or GRU facilities inside Russia, 7 lie within 435 miles of the border, and they have been hit repeatedly with near impunity. The cumulative damage to these storage sites could fundamentally paralyze Russia's offensive ambitions, making their air defenses a solution without a problem. If they cannot protect their most crucial military assets, their purpose becomes questionable, allowing Ukraine to intensify the pressure on Russian logistics and supply chains. Beneath the surface of Russia's battlefield failures in the air, a much deeper rot has set in. The slow-motion collapse of its entire aerospace sector. While hard data on military aircraft production is scarce, the civilian aviation industry offers a worrying glimpse into the crisis. Russia's commercial fleet numbers 994 aircraft, and keeping them airworthy has become a Herculean task for the country's manufacturers and maintenance crews. Crippling Western sanctions have choked off the supply of essential parts and technology, disrupting normal maintenance schedules. This reality forces airlines to fly their planes far beyond recommended service intervals. Worse still, the aging fleet is not being replenished. Moscow once broadcast a bold vision to build over 1,000 new domestic aircraft by 2030, a plan that included 270 MC-21s and 142 superjets, which would have created one of the world's largest modern fleets. That plan is now a ghost. After years of delays, reports indicate that barely any new airframes have been produced in the last 3 years, even as Moscow quietly revised its target down from over $1,000 to just over $990. To meet this reduced goal, Russia would need to begin manufacturing planes at a rate it has never before achieved. Otherwise, the goalposts will just keep moving. A report from the RAND Corporation paints a similarly grim picture for military aviation, suggesting that by 2024, the Russian Air Force was operating at less than 75% of its pre-war strength. It is estimated that Russia is losing around 60 aircraft per year, simply from overuse and a lack of proper upkeep. Meanwhile, the same production bottlenecks strangling the civilian sector mean Russia can only manage to acquire about 23 new military aircraft annually. Ukraine's ascendant power in the air is about more than just shooting down planes and disabling radars. In any conflict between peer adversaries, the force that commands the sky ultimately dictates the terms of engagement on the ground. The entire operational doctrine of NATO is built on the assumption that air superiority is the non-negotiable prerequisite for victory. As air defense technology has advanced, it has forced manned fighter jets to operate from greater standoff distances, diminishing their direct impact. This technological reality pushed both sides in this war toward an attritional fight, dominated by artillery and disposable drones, with major offensive maneuvers stymied by the lack of clear air dominance. But Ukraine's methodical campaign against Russian air defenses is rewriting that calculus. By systematically clearing away Russia's protective umbrella, Ukraine has begun to empower its own revitalized air force to conduct decisive strikes against Russian mechanized assaults and even human wave attacks. The arrival of donated F-16s and Mirage 2000s from European partners has enabled Ukraine to not only challenge Russian aircraft, but also to employ sophisticated air-to-surface missiles to sever supply lines and destroy infrastructure around the vital Donbass region. The impact has been profound, dramatically slowing Russia's daily rate of advance to just 5.6 square miles. To put that in perspective, during the initial invasion in March 2022, Russian forces captured nearly 46,000 square miles in under 5 weeks. Ukraine's demonstrated ability to strike deep within Russia at will has pushed Moscow onto a defensive footing. A recent strike on the VNIIR Progress facility in Cheboksary, some 600 miles from the Ukrainian border, a plant that produces crucial Kometa antennas for Shahed drones and other precision weapons, is another case in point. Ukraine, the smaller nation, is consistently projecting power far into enemy territory, while Russia's capacity to conduct meaningful air operations erodes day by day. Without effective air cover and with their supply lines under constant threat, Russian ground troops are increasingly confined to static, defensive positions. This growing dominance in the air has also become Ukraine's most potent leverage in any future peace negotiations, fundamentally shifting the strategic balance that will shape a final settlement. The news of Operation Spiderweb was strategically released on the very same day President Zelensky announced Ukraine's intention to send a delegation to Istanbul for direct peace talks with Russia. The message was unmistakable. Some commentators and influential Russian military bloggers even labeled the operation Russia's Pearl Harbor. It was a clear signal that Ukraine would negotiate only from a position of undeniable strength. This echoes the strategy seen when Ukrainian forces occupied and held territory in Russia's Kursk region for over 6 months. The greater the pain Ukraine can inflict, the more intense the political pressure on Moscow becomes to withdraw. Furthermore, Ukraine's capacity to orchestrate these complex operations while benefiting from NATO assistance is largely driven by its own domestic industrial base and strategic ingenuity. Every successful mission reinforces the West's confidence that Ukraine is a worthy investment, even if it means weathering the economic blowback of cutting off Russia's vast energy supplies, a move that could trigger significant disruptions across Europe. So, how did Ukraine pull this off? It's a story of two interconnected factors. First, no system is infallible, and Russia's were no exception. Ukraine brilliantly exploited the inherent vulnerabilities in these systems to create an advantage. The S-400, once lauded as one of the world's most advanced air defense platforms, has shown a surprising weakness to threats it was theoretically designed to defeat. Its powerful 91N6E radar, with a detection range of up to 360 miles, appears to be optimized for tracking high-altitude targets like traditional bombers and stealth fighters. This focus creates a low-altitude blind spot, a perfect corridor for ground-hugging drones to exploit. Moreover, Russian air defense doctrine is built on a layered, integrated network. But this integration is also a weakness. If you remove a key component, the system lacks a robust backup plan to compensate for the loss. The aforementioned 92N2E multifunction radars, for instance, handle both target acquisition and tracking, making them a critical single point of failure. Once Ukraine figured out how to eliminate these, an entire S-400 battery could be rendered effectively useless. This highlights a crucial element of Ukraine's military thinking, a fluid fusion of Russian and Western doctrines. Ukrainian military planners and senior engineers possess a deep, almost instinctual familiarity with Soviet-designed equipment like the S-300 and its descendants. Ukraine was, after all, a major hub of the Soviet military-industrial complex and inherited vast stockpiles of its equipment. Russia's response to these newfound vulnerabilities has been telling. Satellite images have revealed Tu-95 and Tu-160 bombers at air bases draped in old car tires, a crude improvised shield against drone attacks. Not all aircraft even received this protection. In other instances, Russia has resorted to painting dark silhouettes of planes on the tarmac, or applying darker paint schemes to the aircraft themselves, desperate attempts at optical camouflage or to create decoys to draw away enemy munitions. Instead of deploying sophisticated countermeasures, Moscow is relying on visual tricks and makeshift defenses to protect its most valuable strategic assets. The technological gap is thrown into even sharper relief when looking at Ukraine's drone capabilities. While Russian state media boasted of the S-400's ability to track and engage numerous threats at once, Operation Spiderweb proved that a coordinated swarm of small, low-flying drones could overwhelm or simply sidestep these complex networks entirely. Russia's predicament has been exacerbated by a self-inflicted economic wound, a consequence of pouring a disproportionate amount of its national wealth into military hardware that is proving ineffective against Ukraine's evolving threats. Just consider the raw arithmetic. A swarm of drones, each costing perhaps between $600 and $1,000, is successfully eliminating strategic bombers. The cost-exchange ratio is astronomical. A single interceptor missile for a system like the Patriot, which would typically be used to counter such aircraft, can cost around $3.7 million, and the bombers themselves are valued in the tens of millions of dollars. Even when factoring in the significant intelligence and logistical effort behind an operation like Spiderweb, the economic lopsidedness is staggering. One successful drone mission can erase a military asset that would cost Russia billions of dollars and years to replace, if it can be replaced at all under the current sanctions regime. The economic fallout radiates far beyond the loss of individual weapons. Each destroyed S-400 battery is not just a $500 million write-off, it's a degradation of Russia's entire integrated air defense posture. When Ukraine takes out a key radar, it punches a hole in the network, forcing Russia to either live with the vulnerability or shuffle other assets to fill the gap, creating a chain reaction of weaknesses along the entire front. Plugging these holes costs money, time, and personnel, resources Russia is rapidly depleting. All of this is happening while Russia's military spending is at a historic high. The 2025 budget has dedicated about 40% of all government expenditure, a staggering 7.5% of its GDP, to defense. Yet this colossal investment is being systematically nullified by Ukrainian innovations that cost a tiny fraction of that to develop and field. This economic reality has become so stark that President Vladimir Putin has already announced a reduced military budget for 2026, a clear admission of the current strategy's failure and the state's dwindling capacity to sustain the war. Compounding this is the pressure from economic sanctions and trade complications. Oil and gas sales, the lifeblood of the Russian economy, have been hit hard by successive waves of sanctions. With China already purchasing its energy at a steep discount, Russia must now invest heavily in a shadow fleet of tankers to circumvent restrictions, adding cost and complexity to every transaction. By April 2025, oil and gas revenues had fallen 25% short of projections. Ukrainian drone manufacturing, in stark contrast, thrives on a completely different economic principle. It's a decentralized ecosystem of over 500 suppliers, from large corporations to small garage workshops. This distributed model fosters a resilience and cost-effectiveness that traditional, centralized military-industrial complexes can't replicate. When one small workshop develops an enhancement, that innovation is shared across the entire network in days via platforms like the Delta Information System. This is why Ukraine's technological advancement is measured in weeks and months, not the years or decades typical of traditional military procurement cycles. Russia's industrial crisis is not confined to aerospace and energy. It permeates every corner of its military-industrial complex. The country's inability to produce high-end precision machinery means that nearly every advanced weapon system relies on imported components, which sanctions have made exceedingly scarce. Simultaneously, Russian companies are being squeezed by their own government. Desperate for equipment, the state is issuing contracts at prices so low that many firms cannot operate profitably. Because the government is the largest and often only customer, companies are forced into contracts that don't even cover their manufacturing costs. This forces them to operate at a loss, shedding staff to stay afloat and worsening an already dire manpower crisis. Russian state media has openly acknowledged a severe shortage of engineers in the defense industry, with one official claiming 120,000 more were needed just to maintain the offensive. The total manpower deficit across the sector is estimated at around 400,000 people. Even foundational industries like metallurgy are struggling. A Russian company that produces chromium compounds, essential for high-grade alloys, is hobbled by restrictions that prevent it from sourcing foreign technology. This triggers a domino effect, making it difficult to produce even basic materials at the quality required for modern military hardware, leading to systemic quality control problems. Faced with a deficit of high-quality domestic materials and unable to import them, Russia must turn to lower-grade substitutes or to partners like North Korea for artillery shells and Iran for Shahed drones. This introduces another layer of unreliability, with some estimates suggesting that as many as half of the munitions from North Korea are duds. The shockwaves from Ukraine's success are being felt far beyond the immediate battlefield, compelling military planners in NATO, China, and across the globe to fundamentally rethink 21st-century warfare. The long-held paradigm of air superiority, achieved with fighter jets and surface-to-air missiles, has been turned on its head. Conventional air defense systems were built to counter singular high-altitude threats like enemy fighters and ballistic missiles. What has emerged is a new low-altitude battlespace, a domain populated by small drones that traditional military doctrines have largely ignored. Ukraine has proven that swarms of cheap, intelligent drones can achieve strategic objectives against some of the most sophisticated and expensive defense systems in the world. NATO planners are now collaborating with Ukrainian engineers to explore these concepts for their own national defense. The realization is dawning that legacy air defense systems are ill-equipped to handle coordinated swarms of smart drones that can communicate and adapt to countermeasures on the fly. NATO's own reliance on capable but non-stealthy aircraft like the F-16, Rafale, and Typhoon is being called into question. Ukraine has shown that even these advanced platforms are vulnerable to well-deployed modern air defenses. The conflict suggests that only truly low-observable aircraft like the F-35, augmented by advanced electronic warfare suites, can reliably operate in such contested environments, and that's assuming the future of air combat isn't dominated entirely by drones anyway. The economic implications are just as revolutionary. If Ukraine's distributed, low-cost model can be scaled for national defense, the traditional military-industrial approach of spending billions to develop single platforms over decades may be rendered obsolete. The Pentagon is already scrambling to field countermeasures to small drones, procuring systems like the Coyote interceptor, which costs $100,000 per shot, a price that is still unsustainable against swarms of disposable, cheaply produced drones. European defense ministries may need to overhaul their entire approach to military innovation. The old model of centralized, state-led programs seems archaic when compared to Ukraine's nimble networks that can iterate on new designs in months. The lessons learned in Ukraine have direct relevance to other potential flashpoints. Any future conflict over Taiwan, for example, must now account for scenarios involving swarms of naval drones, both on and below the surface. China's military leadership must be asking if their massive investments in air defense can withstand the kind of asymmetric attacks that have so effectively humbled Russia. Taiwan, meanwhile, is actively developing a porcupine defense strategy that mirrors many of Ukraine's tactics. Even as China's own military technology is still widely seen as lagging behind that of the United States, it is still too early to know how Ukraine's campaign of aerial denial will ultimately shape the war's outcome. While Kyiv is achieving remarkable tactical successes, the grim reality of a prolonged war of attrition still looms. Russia's sheer size and population could allow it to absorb these losses and extend the conflict to a point where Ukraine's momentum, manpower, and resources begin to wane. Yet there is another possibility, that Russia could collapse from within. With one crisis compounding another, Vladimir Putin's hold on power is more precarious than ever. If the elites around him begin to believe he no longer serves Russia's interests, either at home or abroad, a move to oust him is not out of the question. And with no clear line of succession, such an event could plunge Russia itself into chaos. Until that day comes, the world will continue to watch this real-life David and Goliath story play out in the skies of Eastern Europe.